Okay, so episode 4 of The Acolyte is here and we need to break it down. So let's get straight into it. We see Kalnacca traversing the woods on his way back to his house, which is really a crashed spaceship. We get this quick shot of these swirly dotted patterns on the wall, and these patterns seem to be somewhat similar to the patterns we saw in an earlier episode that the witches had. So clearly this is intended to be a clue as to what really went down that night, and a sign as to Kalnacca's state of mind, which, like Torbin, is still haunted by that event. We see Kalnacca preparing some food, and again more witch symbols. We cut to Jecki Lon, who is training with other padawans, and instructing them is Jedi Master Lakshay. We hear Lakshay talk about diminishing areas of vulnerability and maximizing defense without needing to strike. And all of this is really just core Jedi principles when it comes to lightsaber combat, preferring to adopt a more defensive fighting style. Jecki speaks to Osha, who tells her that she is leaving, and the two seem to have a closer relationship with each other over the recent events, which I do think isn't quite that convincing, considering that it doesn't feel like they've spent a lot of time together. Osha clearly feels some guilt over letting May slip away, especially towards Sol, something which will undoubtedly be a major point later down the line. We cut to May looking for Kalnacca with Qimir, and May is then reminded that she needs to kill a Jedi without a weapon. Back at the Jedi Temple, we see the Jedi deliberate and examine May's fighting, and we get our first big cameo, and it is none other than Ki-Adi-Mundi, the future Jedi Council member that we see in the prequels. It's quite an interesting fact that we see Ki-Adi-Mundi here, as although his age is not officially known in canon, it was previously estimated that he would be around his 70s when he died, but given his appearance here, it's pretty clear that he is much older than that. From the looks of things, it seems as though he is already a Jedi Knight at the very least, and given that the events of the Acolyte take place almost 100 years before the Phantom Menace, that would easily place him in the 100s by the time of his death. We then hear Jedi Master Holden say May is weak as emotions guide her moves. Master Sol tries to assert that May isn't as big of a threat as the other Jedi think she is, and we hear some ideas about who her master might be, with the idea of a splinter order being introduced. And the fact that the idea of this possibility is brought onto the table is actually kind of cool because it does hint towards certain past events within the Legends continuity. The very first that we know of was known as the Great Schism, which ultimately led to wars between the light side and dark side users. Then there was the 100-Year Darkness, which we saw exiled Jedi establish the Sith Order. Venestra pushes back against Sol by saying that May is dangerous as she killed 2 Jedi Masters and managed to evade capture. So again, we see this tension and difference in how the Jedi should approach the problem, with Sol taking a much more compassionate approach, while Venestra has a more hardline approach. And the reasons for these differences in approach is quickly revealed when Ki-Adi-Mundi suggests that the Jedi inform the High Council. The High Council refers to the main Jedi Council, the one that we know, the one with Yoda on it. Venestra pushes back against the idea of informing the High Council on the basis that the High Council will be obligated to inform the Senate, giving the Jedi's political opponents the possibility of using this against the Jedi Order. What we're seeing here is the Jedi being ingrained into Republic politics, which have now begun to influence their own internal decisions, even if those decisions deviate from what the Jedi normally do. You also get a sense that Ki-Adi-Mundi internally disagrees with this decision, even though he is not in a position to do so. This sort of adherence to the Jedi High Council is also reflected in his later life, as he was known for sticking to the Jedi Code. And you could almost read this disagreement as Ki-Adi-Mundi preferring to inform the Senate, potentially believing that this is part of the duty of the Jedi, the sort of belief that would see him place a lot of misplaced trust in Chancellor Palpatine. The Jedi meeting is adjourned, and as Venestra challenges Sol over certain points, we get to see that she is kinda mindful about not being overheard by the other Jedi, specifically Master Holden and Ki-Adi-Mundi, which might hint at some internal politics even within the Jedi Order. Venestra ultimately defaults back to letting Sol take the lead, which does help maintain continuity with this scene in the prequels.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
Sol manages to catch Osha before she leaves, and in the background we can see an A-list Jedi, the very same species as Bairn from the Bad Batch. Sol ultimately convinces her to stay a little longer, and there's this moment where Osha lightens up at the possibility of rejoining the Jedi Order, which quickly fades when Sol says not officially. And you get the sense of what Osha is really looking for is forgiveness and acceptance from her old master, two things that are really preventing her from moving forward and potentially rejoining the Jedi Order. Soul tries to convince Osha that there is still good in May, which really represents the best of the Jedi, and in some ways mirrors Luke's own faith in his father.
There is still good in him.
We are then introduced to Basil, a Tinnin tracker with a very keen sense of smell. The Tinnin is a species that first appeared in the 1979 Han Solo's Revenge, which was later canonized in the Rogue One novel. This aquatic species would later play a big role in the Galactic Civil War, especially when it came to gathering data. The group tracks Kalnacca, and a pretty underrated part about this whole scene is actually the terrain changes. More often than not, Star Wars has a way of portraying worlds as being dominated by a single biome, but in this case, as we see the Jedi descend into the valley, the surrounding changes from sparse grasslands to thick jungle biomes. Just a cool little detail that adds something new to the franchise. Osha is ambushed by a sort of winged bug creature named an Umbrameth. And when Soul dispatches it, the Jedi notes that the bug was attracted to light, so definitely expect the guys to be back when night falls in the next episode. Osha gets disturbed by this as she notes that she felt the bug through the Force, which led to its death. Osha and Jecki have another moment, and we get a little gem of wisdom when Jecki tells Osha that we are not defined by what we lost, but by what we survive. It's a rather hopeful piece of advice that you would expect a Jedi Master to give, so it really speaks to Jecki being far wiser beyond her years. May and Qimir take a break, and we learn that May having to kill a Jedi without a weapon was not a test, but the final lesson. Stating that your final lesson is one you teach yourself, you will kill Jedi without a weapon. With the rationale being that Jedi do not kill the unarmed, and so if you force a Jedi to kill someone unarmed, you will have won. It's a pretty common trope in Star Wars that really hasn't been vocalized until now. It sort of harkens back to why Palpatine was asking Luke to strike him down even though he was unarmed, as doing so would be against the Jedi way.
Take your weapon. Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
And so what the Dark Lord is trying to teach May here is to goad the Jedi into attacking her when she is unarmed, thereby manipulating them to violate the very principles that make them a Jedi.
I shouldn't.
Do it.
May tells Qimir it's impossible, but Qimir insists that it is, and after a back and forth, May realizes that she has no option but to betray her master. She would fail to complete her mission in the way her master described, and he would kill her. Another point to note is that now that she knows her sister is alive, killing Jedi is no longer important. It's a rather natural progression of character that actually makes a lot of sense. So knowing this, she decides to turn herself in, hoping to give up information on her master in exchange for Osha. As the Jedi trek through the Force, Soul tells Osha that all will be revealed when she finally confronts May, which just ramps up the suspense. May tries to get to Kalnacca, but it turns out that he is already dead, having been killed by a lightsaber, hinting at the Dark Lord's presence. The Jedi call out May, but Soul senses the Dark Lord's approach. We then get the coolest, creepiest scene of the show so far, with the Dark Lord just floating down behind Osha, sort of like a phantom. The Jedi try to confront the Dark Lord, but they all get blown away. I mean, what a cliffhanger. I really enjoyed this episode. It does feel like a lot of the setup is out of the way and that we're finally into the swing of the show. Also, the fact that we got this confrontation so early in the show just tells me that there is a lot more to come. Anyways, that's all for this breakdown. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.